Hi everybody, welcome to On Air with Owen. I am joined today by Alex Packham, who is the founder and CEO of ContentCal. Alex, thanks for joining me today. Really good to have you on.
Yeah, no, good. Really excited to be here.
Fantastic, brilliant stuff. So before we get into things, just to quickly go over what we're going to be talking about today, we've got a topic which is growing revenue from a founder's perspective. I'm really excited to talk about this with you because I think we sit in the same boat here as two founders, people that have grown a business and continue to want to do that ambitiously, but have had to bring teams in to help grow revenue and to drive that. So I'm excited by the conversation. Before we get into things though, can you give me the 1 minute on Alex and ContentCal? 1 minute. Who's Alex? Who are ContentCal?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So who's Alex? I've been in social media, digital marketing for about 11 years, since the early days of the likes of Facebook, Twitter, etc., kind of having a commercial world surround their business models, both internally in terms of what they offer, and then obviously businesses like ours that offer services that kind of wrap around the social networks. I've had stints in corporate life where I've run social media content marketing for big brands like Odeon and Now TV. I have built and run a social media agency off the back of those. So kind of done it all in those sort of fields. And ContentCal was almost born out of the back of that experience. So kind of realizing that the challenges these big organizations face are exactly the same actually as challenges that small, medium-sized businesses face. The process is just slightly different and slightly either elongated or shortened. So ContentCal was born out of corporate experience and the sort of agency experience working with different business models. And we offer content marketing and social media marketing solutions in a SaaS platform. So over the course of the sort of life of my agency, we actually morphed that into a SaaS business over the last sort of 4 years. So it's been an exciting journey. But big vision. We want to be the number one player in the market. We think we've got a really great, unique selling point, which is really resonating and scaling really quick, particularly in the last sort of 12 months. So it's a super exciting time for us.
Fantastic. Thank you. Good summary. I can tell you've done that before. Really nice to have you on. So look, I think let's start with the notion of sales and where you are today, and we can work backwards a little bit. So how involved are you today as a CEO and a founder, 5 years in, give or take, in the sales process and demand gen for your own business?
Yeah, I'm more of I would say, strategist and problem solver at this stage. My personal background is not in sort of sales or SaaS sales at all, really. My background is really marketing and being an entrepreneur. So I suppose I've got natural skills in sales, which you have to have in every role, especially a leadership role. I know how to sell my ideas, I know how to sell concepts, and obviously I do a lot of fundraising, which is a sales process in itself. But in terms of with the team and internally now, I would say I'm more of ideas generator. So I'll throw stuff at them all the time and say, have we tried this? Have we tried that? Here's new tactics I've read about. And then problem solver. So, if we can't engage with a prospect, or there's someone that needs to kind of hear from me just about what our vision is and where we're going in the future, I'll jump into some sales cycles on that. But I'm a good arm's length, I would say, from the team, who do a great job at actually doing the doing of sales, definitely.
Yeah. So I'm interested in this, how many of your ideas stick? So I'm like floating, cause a problem for half the time, solve a problem half the time.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, not that many. Like I love throwing stuff at them, and you get probably, I don't know, out of 100 ideas, 10 that are actually any good to stick within a given year, and that's about right in anything. So yeah, I'm kind of chief ideas man, chuck stuff out there, see what sticks. But I one skill I have learned is once you put them out there, back away and let the guys figure it out, because they don't need me to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really keen. This isn't necessarily focused just on sales, but I know you've hired a managing director, so you've brought an MD in who I assume runs the day-to-day of the business and the commercial side of the business. That must have been a big decision for a founder to take that leap and a jump. A, it's not cheap as a decision, and B, you're letting go of a lot, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I wish I'd done it sooner, put it that way. So, from a decision-making kind of profile, as I said, I knew I was not a natural salesperson. And Andy, who's been with the business for years, who's someone we brought in our founding team, he's been brilliant at getting that engine started and morphed into other roles. So we did have someone who was kind of the salesperson who is then morphed into other stuff. But in terms of commercial, so, looking at sales as a function and not just as a, sales cycle, an actual sales process, what is the entire function going to be? The commercial sort of nous off the back of that, so pricing strategy, partnerships, everything that really encompasses that commercial touch point is critical. So you know, there's a point in your journey, depending on your own experiences and stuff, you have to say, am I the right person to be running this? And, you know, and as I said, I should have made the decision sooner, but as soon as you start to kind of face facts around that sort of stuff and just be open and honest with yourself, provided you have the means, you know, get the right people in to do the roles that you're not the expert at. And yeah, I would advise that anyone who's not from that background to do it as soon as possible, because it's been game changing for the business, definitely.
It's interesting though, because that emotional process of effectively sacking yourself out of part of your role and your function as a founder is a real acceptance that you're not the greatest, that you're not the best, but the sooner you do, the faster you go. So it's really good to hear that decision has made and has worked, because you do hear horror stories the other way, don't you?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I would honestly say about 2 years ago, I had a very internal kind of processing moment, probably this time of the year or just over Christmas or something like that, where I actually sat myself down and said, you know, if you're going to be successful in running a business, you've actually got to technically be a person who's pretty much doing nothing day to day, you know, not doing nothing in terms of actually nothing, but practically you shouldn't really be running or doing any of the real key roles within your organization. You should be an enabler of them. You should be creating the environment for other people to succeed. It's really hard to get your head around that, but, you know, putting yourself in the background and actually letting everyone else, you know, around you who's got the experience to succeed and run those functions and be successful is how ultimately as a leader you will be successful. So I'll take very much the hands-off approach, which is it's definitely enabled us to kind of scale beyond where we were before.
Very nice. And I think it gives you that mindset where you go through a transition where you feel like, where do I belong within the business? Where should I contribute? Where am I getting in the way? Where am I hanging over somebody? Where am I not contributing enough? That's a real transition. I've been through it too, and it's tough. But then you get to a stage you go, hang on a second, this business runs itself day to day without me most of the time. That's a really nice feeling. Let's look at sales, because you talked about sales not being necessary. You've got a natural skill set in there, but it's not something that you've come through a sales role or a sales function. So what did you do in the early days? How did you contribute? Were you on the front line selling? Were you behind a team of people helping them structure the sales process? Where were you?
Yeah, I mean, where I ran an agency before, I would say my natural skill set is in the kind of consultative or personal sales. So I love building relationships with people. I love meeting people. I love hearing about their challenges. And I get a real kick, as you can imagine, from like an ideas perspective, coming up with things that solve problems. Like I'm a natural problem solver. So I was good in that type of sales environment where you're having one-on-one dialogues with people and it's an ongoing relationship. As soon as it came to a product where it was kind of transactional selling, where, you know, you build a little bit of rapport, but fundamentally they want to buy something out of the box, whatever it is, I was useless, frankly. You know, it's not my skill set whatsoever. I would be on calls trying to build rapport and stuff, but actually we didn't necessarily have the right product for them, so we had no chance in actually selling to them. So, you know, once that was in my head and I actually got my own personal mindset around that was when I said, right, to one of our advisors and investors in the early days, like, we need someone to do this. This is definitely not me. And he was really good at coaching me in and around that in the early days. So I was very much like in the process of like understanding client needs, understanding the problems, and actually better off feeding those into product functions, for example, to bring features and functionality to life. And then also articulating the problems to someone who then understood how to turn it into a sales pitch, which was Andy. So, you know, he interviewed me, we did some role play backwards and forwards to understand what the challenges are. Went through all of my LinkedIn and everything else and said, give me all the leads, give me everyone. And I was thinking, oh, that's weird. You're going to email a bunch of people that I would just never reach out to and think I was going to annoy them if I emailed them. But he was like, Alex, it's totally normal. This is what sales is. You know, you just got to put yourself out there. So, I mean, that was a few years ago, but that's what I did really. I would say I kind of was the genesis of it. And then actually, once it was turned into a process, we just went on a journey to turn that process into something repeatable and scalable.
So how big is the sales team now? How many people touch on direct sales rather than marketing?
Yeah, it's about 7. And there's one sort of head of sales, Kayvon, who's come in the last couple of years and been great for sort of, you know, bringing structure to the team. And then he reports into the managing director, chap Jim, who again has also been amazing. And then we have 6 people who deal with different clients. So one is sort of like mid-market upwards, and well, half of them are, and then the other guys kind of deal with the smaller end of the customer base. And then account management, sort of, I mean, it's obviously a bit different, but it sort of overlaps. So we've got 4 in account management who look after existing customers.
Yeah, okay, fine. And one of the things that I think the people listening to this or watching this will want to know is it's not just always the things that have worked really well, because I think it's very easy to talk about the brilliant stuff, but what are the things that you've tried when it comes to revenue growth for the company that have failed, and you look back on and think, either I should never have done that, or actually I'd do it again, but I'd do it a different way? You got any good examples?
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, and I would say this is very specific to SaaS, but a lot of other products, relying on e-commerce style, sales where people just buy online and assuming that people are going to want to do that is really not right. Again, like personal bias, I prefer actually, but trialing a product myself, going through it, and if I want to buy it, I prefer to buy it myself and just be left alone. Most people actually don't either want that, or actually number two, it's not the best process, because actually if you speak to someone, show them the breadth of the product, show them what it does, talk to them about the pricing structures, you've got them in that conversation, they're learning, they're if they're agreeable to it and they've signed up for a trial, so they obviously want something like this product, you're much more likely to convert them. So we in the early days was very reliant on the kind of product-led growth thing, but we had no awareness in the market, we were an unknown entity. Like, you've got to speak to people in that scenario. So in the early phase, I would say get talking to customers and just speak to them. If you're not a salesperson, understand their challenges to refine the pitch, but get in there and really figure out how you're going to do the unscalable stuff at the start to kind of get your sales engine off the ground. So we were way too reliant on kind of organic, just product-led growth, which we have invested in since, but it doesn't get you off the ground, in my opinion, or very rarely does anyway. We have done good and bad bursts of advertising. One of the things about the inbound model, so we sell 100% inbound largely, is that you've got to generate warm leads from good sources, and a lot of people default to like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all the normal channels, but really where you want to start is kind of the more niche stuff specific to your industry. So we actually found review sites, blogs, kind of quirky characters that love social media and just really wanted to educate people on the products that are available, and almost like ContentCal was a hidden gem within the suite that they'd never heard about. So get really focused on the passionate community that you want to be your almost like your advocates, really, and that's been really successful for us, and we love them. They're so passionate about ContentCal and social media as much as we are, so they help us sell the product really, and certainly create awareness for us. So it's a combination of many things that do the unscalable stuff at the start to get it off the ground, because that really helps. And then once you get the engine behind you, you can invest in other areas.
I love the fact, naturally, because of what we do, and I love it. But I love the fact that you focused on human conversation in the sales process. I mean, I'm a big believer that in B2B sales, human to human conversation, whether that's face-to-face, phone, web, whatever, it's the most critical piece of it, because you can have all the demand you like and hope that people buy through an automated process. We know that that's very difficult. And equally, you can use email to outreach. We can use it, but ultimately, having conversations with people gives you two things. A, it gives you momentum in sales, but B, it gives you learnings, because it's two-way. It's two-way conversation. So many things that we do aren't like that. So it's really nice to hear you talk about that. So let's take ourselves back to Alex with businesses going somewhere, making first sales hire. And then we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I'm sure there've been some out of the door in that time as well, and it's never straight line up, is it? But let's just talk about that for a moment. What were you looking for in number one? What are the criteria? Like, what are the things that you look for in a sales person or somebody in the sales department, and how has that changed between then and now as that process has matured?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In the first person you want to work with, passion is critical. This person is going to be probably taking some sort of salary sacrifice. They want to be able to buy into the big vision, the journey. They're coming in hopefully with some sort of equity to be the sort of founding salesperson or growth role. They've got to be really disciplined in terms of how they operate as individuals, because in an early stage startup, you are generally, left to it to a certain extent, or you certainly should be anyway. Vocal, able to share their views, dynamic thinker, doesn't need to be told exactly what to do and just follow the script and process, etc. So you really need someone who is really a self-starter, great levels of kind of passion, like I say, intelligence, and actually then is disciplined to say, okay, give me 3 months and I'm going to give you like all of my impact, and I'm going to give you all the right reports and stuff you need to go through that. And also someone who doesn't come away from lots of no's, because that does happen in sales, lots of not interested, and say, oh, this is not working out, see you later. It's someone like, I'm getting loads of no's, these are the reasons why, how do I engage with the rest of the people in the team to actually bring these issues and turn them around into positives? So you need someone really dynamic. The flip happens completely when you want to get into process. So actually you find along your journey between sort of going from 0 to say 10 salespeople or whatever it may be, that you need not less of it. Well, you do need less of it in theory, but like you need people who are much more interested in operating within a successful process. So almost as you're scaling from the kind of early bit to the sort of repeatable bit, you need less of it as you go, because you know, you're going to always get feedback from customers. You're always going to get lots of no's. You're always going to have loads of changes. And eventually you get so many feedback requests and things from product that it's just not possible to do them all. Then you get to the complexity of prioritization. But what you do need at the latter stages, people who can follow process, can take the best practices that you've built and actually execute on them over and over and over and over again, and enjoys that, you know, and really loves the fact that it is somewhat repetitive. They don't have to think, you know, how am I going to have a different conversation today? It's actually, I'm having a very formulaic chat and I love getting them across the line, and I love meeting people. So it's pretty different. You know, the repeatable bit and the scalable bit does need that sort of level of input and energy. Whereas when you're trying to make something a bit more dynamic, you need a slightly different character, basically.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk about that, because I think it's very easy to say, I need a good sales rep, or I need a good SDR, or I need a good AE, whatever it is, and not think about beyond the skill set, but actually looking at the fit as well, the fit of where you are as a business, the stage, because of course you want longevity out of people. The first person in needs to be commercially savvy enough that they can contribute strategically, but be prepared to roll their sleeves up and get in the trenches. And that's a hard thing to find. Of course, 2 years later, you don't want somebody to be contributing strategically in their day to day, because you've already got two captains of the team. You don't need a third. You know, it's a totally different selection criteria, though the end result hasn't moved, hasn't changed.
Exactly. It's a really hard dynamic, and it's kind of one of those ones where you have to kind of be quite proactive about it. You know, if you need to learn, like me, I had to learn about all this stuff as I went, basically. You have to really educate yourself on what is going on, because unless you know that journey, it's always going to be new to you, kind of thing.
Okay. And let's look at your top contributing revenue earner last year, whoever that is. You can choose to name them if you want to or not. That's entirely your choice. What is it that they do that makes them there? That makes them get there? Like, do they do things differently? Have they just got that je ne sais quoi that we don't know what it is, or can you obviously see what they do that's different to other people?
Yeah, I'll tell you what's really interesting about this is that you'll find that people construct, obviously you create a script and a narrative, but you find that people tend to then obviously tweak them and change them to their own style and things like that, which is really good. I think what I found is the top reps in our world have created a really concise story, which really does take the best parts of kind of the company story, but they do have their spin on it. So the narrative is really succinct. You know, the worst thing you want is someone who's kind of got half a story and then has to blag things at the end. You know, they've rehearsed it, they've really understood it, and they've nailed it. The second thing is articulation, like someone who's really articulate, knows how to speak, you know, knows how to handle a Zoom call environment, knows when to not talk, you know, knows when to shut up, knows when to ask questions versus when to actually demo things. So having that kind of real smarts about them, basically, you know, that they know how to talk and they know how to convey their message, but they also know when to back off. And then the follow-up, you know, and the close, and that might be the follow-up, literally trying to close them on the call. And we get really good at that. You know, that's our thing, one call demo. We really try and do that and close them on the one call. But also, again, going back to that astuteness, knowing when that's not going to happen and saying, do you know what, you know, I'm not going to try and do that at the end of this call. I'm going to go right through the process, and then has the discipline to follow up in that process. I think the other thing and the last thing really is truly understanding the kind of wow moments in the product. So getting a really good in tune sort of feeling with the product and saying, I know for this type of customer, this feature is going to be the one I want to talk about the most because, you know, it fits their buying criteria. So if you can really be strategic about highlighting those things to the right audience and making notes as you go, who they are and stuff, and adapt and tweak obviously to different types of customers, you're golden, really. And those are the trends that I see in our most successful reps, definitely.
This point emphasizes a discussion that I have regularly, which is that good salespeople don't have one thing that they're exceptionally good at. They have lots of little things that they're slightly better at that multiply and make them 2, 3, 4 times better than other people. But you can't narrow it down to one or two things. It's always lots of little things. They just do that incremental improvement on other people in the team, and they do that consistently.
Definitely.
Well. Yeah,
definitely.
Very, very interesting. So if we just have a look at the business for a second, tell us about your fundraising journey, because I'm interested to know what impact that has had on revenue growth, both positive and negative, because I know that fundraising takes a hell of a lot of focus away from the running of the business. It's a hard job. It's a full-time job for a founder and CEO quite often. Keen to understand how that's impacted on revenue growth, but also the other way around. Once the funds land, I guess that gives it an acceleration. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, I would say the first thing is like, if I look back on my journey raising cash, it's the sooner you understand how that process works itself, the better, because you can be fundraising all the time, like you said. And I would say that in my journey, that's very much, part of my role. I haven't had a year where I've not fundraised since I started ContentCal. And the downside of that is, like you say, it's great when you land the money, but at the same time, you as a founder haven't really focused on what's going on as much as you should do or could do in the business. Therefore, you're a bit, you're a bit rusty on some of that stuff. And actually, if you don't raise enough, you've only got yourself enough that you can do that for 6 months before you have to go back out again. So truly understanding the fundraising cycle, who to get money from, whether it's angels, whether it's funds, whether it's VCTs, EIS funds, etc. How long does that actually give you runway wise? Getting your head around the mechanics of that is really critical. So I'd say on a plus side, look, we've been, I think, pretty successful in raising money. We've raised just over £5 million. Over 4 years, half of that's from angels and half of that's from a VC called Fuel Ventures. The first half of that money was drip fed in by angels. So as I said, we kind of had a period of this effectively rather than a period of that. If you trended it, it would look like that, but it took a lot of cycles to get the business to a good stage, which is the downside. On the upside, when Fuel Ventures put their cash in, so they invested £2.5 million, that has given us 2 years pretty much runway, really. And obviously we've invested quite heavily in certain areas versus others, but all of our teams have expanded. And what that gives you as an organization is a moment to step back, not too long, but a moment to step back and say, right, if we do these things and we do them concurrently, so you can suddenly afford to quadruple your marketing spend as well as quadruple the size of your sales team, and you do them sort of concurrently as you go, you're getting the dual benefit of like what I call proper growth. There was a great analogy actually, which I can't remember off the top of my head, that someone said to me the other day. There's like 4 sets of car things, whether you need to turbo the engine, whether you need to kind of get a much faster car in general. I can't remember the exact thing, but there are all these little tuning things you can do to the kind of machine of sales and marketing. And if you do enough of them, great, because you get them all working at the same time. But if you can only do 1 or 2, it's often not enough actually to get you to the next stage. So yeah, there's just tons of stuff between all the funding journeys that you kind of learn that you could improve on and get right. But I would say understanding the cycle of that and then understanding the impact it can have on the company is kind of something to really thoroughly research before you raise any money.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. I think it's an area that a lot of people don't understand and understand well. And it's a bit like the first time you go out and get a mortgage, that nobody teaches you how to do that. And everyone assumes what they're talking about when they talk about interest rates. And of course it's complex in the numbers and that sort of stuff. So
it's so similar. Yeah, it's so similar to that, definitely. And it's so much, if I'm honest, it's so much more complex. If you think that's, I remember my version of that. Yeah, no, it's a good analogy.
Yeah, that's the consumer version of it. And I think there's so many different types, there's so many different expectations. And of course you can't ask the question because then you don't know what you're talking about. So you've got to go and either blag it on that conversation and go and find out later, or make sure you've done a hell of a lot of prep and
there's a lot of that.
Never easy. And I guess when that cash comes in, there's a temptation you need to have a good plan or the cash doesn't come in the first place, but there's a temptation to push a bit harder. I guess you go into that scientific, in theory, trial and error mode where you say, right, we're going to try these 4 new things. You've got to set a time frame that is realistic to allow it to give you some sensible metrics and data, but also be prepared to pull on the things that aren't working so well and push on the things that are. I don't know about you, but I personally enjoy that process because it's a chance to try new things. It's a chance to genuinely see an impact on the business. But equally, it's hard because you've got to say yes and then no to certain things. You've got to switch things on and off, and you've got to be on it because otherwise things can run away with you. So that must have been an interesting phase for you when that 2.5 million came in.
It's definitely different. I tell you what, like the pit you've just mentioned there. So it took me back when we did this and when we got back into that mode, what I used to do in corporate jobs is, when I used to work at Sky, we had a lot of money to do tests, concurrent A/B tests. Yeah. If we spent a load of money on something that didn't work, not that it didn't matter, it was a great learning exercise, but it, wasn't going to break the bank. Whereas when you're running sort of hand to mouth, so to speak, everything matters, and the tiniest things that can go wrong can destroy the company at the end of the day. Yeah. So when you have to reverse your mindset out of that and say, right, actually, we need to spend £500,000, and if we waste, you know what I mean, use 100 grand of it, and it's not as effective as we thought, we can't have the same mindset that it's going to just end the business. We've got to take the learnings, like you say, funnel all the money that's working into the stuff that does. So you have to re-engineer the mind basically about how to operate the company and take more risks.
Yeah.
It doesn't get less risky, to be honest. It gets more risky as you take on more funding and you run more experiments. And you also find out, whether you truly have a scalable, VC style business. If you can't get to that scale in a good time frame, it's either the market telling you it's not possible, or you're going to need a bit longer. And that's always difficult when you've raised a lot of money and borne a lot of costs. So it's a fine balance, definitely. And you've got to remember you're running a business, even though you've just been given a big pile of cash, so you can do experiments and it can, you spend some on R&D, you're still running a business. It's not a giant science experiment. And that's really important to remember when you do that.
I'm imagining a giant science experiment and you sitting there with your glasses on going, trying to make it all work, and steam bubbling out of there, and a couple of Bunsen burners on the go.
Can't be doing that. Yeah, can't be doing that.
and I saw a post from you, I'm going to guess it was first week of Jan, where you clearly outlined in a public forum on LinkedIn what your goals were for 2020. What year are we now? 2021. And I thought that was really interesting. You might not be able to reel them all off straight away, but tell us about your goals for this year, whether it's within ContentCal or maybe there's some personal ones as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've been doing goal setting for 10 years. It's not that that's revolutionary, but I've been really passionate about goal setting. Someone said to me the other day, actually knows me quite well, I'm in their top 3 people of like self-improvement, which I really didn't think of my own mindset. I thought my way of thinking was just the way it is, but I'm really passionate about all that stuff. So I decided this year I was going to put it out there, and I'm going to do a lot. I have been, and definitely going to do a lot more of that. The first one for ContentCal is triple the revenue. We're on a big growth push. Whether we get to exactly that or around that number, that's what we've got to do. So we've got to triple our revenue base, which requires a huge amount of work and a huge amount of effort. The other ContentCal driven ones, we want to make the business famous, and that sounds a bit sort of soft and wishy-washy, but it's actually really important. Companies that you hear of in press, whether that's for funding rounds or other reasons, or get famous for whatever they get famous for, it doesn't happen by accident, just like sales doesn't. If you want to be a really big business, you need to be known within the industry, you need to be respected, and you need that reputation. So we've got a big push on that. We've got all the normal stuff like improve churn metrics and make sure we keep more customers and release more features. So there's a whole bunch of stuff on that, which we're focused on. From a personal perspective, I look at my role every year and rewrite myself a job spec, for example. So I kind of have like a CEO job spec, a founder job spec, and then I have Alex's plan, if that makes sense. So I kind of have some personal stuff that I look at, whether that's advisory roles or angel investing a little bit and stuff like that. So I push myself on all boundaries. And I'm an obsessive tracker. Like, I have a whole system for all this stuff, which makes me very nerdy. But like, it really helps me set the scene for the year, and then I break it down every month and put myself through a little appraisal. Because when you are an entrepreneur, although you might have a board and advisors, you don't get that kind of sit down with someone to say, here's everything I've achieved, can we bound off each other and stuff. You have to make sure you're doing that for yourself and with people that you trust.
Yeah. I'm imagining you again with Bunsen burners and your goggles on and that kind of stuff, with your scientific, with all your spreadsheets.
That stuff's a bit more like that. That's a bit more geeky.
like it. Brilliant. That's an amazing set of goals. And we just take that back to sales and revenue growth, triple revenue growth. Geez, that's ambitious. Not unheard of, but ambitious. What's fueling that? So what channels are you planning on investing in? What do you see being the key contributors to that revenue growth?
Yeah, so I mean, our key model is inbound, right? So a big push on advertising and content. Those are the two biggest things. So, significantly upping things like PPC, paid social. There's some cost per acquisition stuff we do as well, cost per lead stuff. So really scaling that. We're doubling our spend in that we did last year. So we're into the millions of pounds on that now. Growing our sales team to be able to deal with that is a key thing, obviously. So making sure we actually have the people to take the demos and arrange the demos and make sure there's follow-up done, etc. So you've got to have the engine with the guys to make sure they can do that and they have enough capacity to do that. We look at pricing, making sure that we're charging the right prices for the customer, making sure that they're on an amount that works for them, but also works for us as business. And a big thing that people always forget in this is reducing churn. If you can get customers to stay for longer, the business just becomes more profitable generally from a gross margin and a net margin perspective. So really focusing on our retention rates and looking after customers. The other thing is you find once you've won them, they don't not want to hear from you again. It's not quite the Netflix model. You do want to engage with your customers, not just leave them to it. So really focus on that as well.
Yeah, okay. And as the business grows, triple revenue, probably into the next funding round, you're going to start squirreling away, looking for money again, to drive the next phase, no doubt. What's your plan to make sure that you're involved in revenue growth and you stay connected and more just comfortable in understanding what's happening there and what's working and what's not, as your role becomes more and more strategic and that distance between the day-to-day frontline and your role gets wider and wider and wider? How will you achieve that?
Yeah, good question. I mean, look, I'm very open with our team about everything that happens in terms of our targets, our goals, where we're at, where we're not, and I'm very approachable. I have, if not daily, but if not every other day, kind of dialogues with our heads of sales, whether that's just on Slack or whether that's having a quick chat. So I get like a lot of feedback, and we have a very public forum on that online, so people can share where they've won, where they've done well, etc. I drop in as often as I can to the weekly sales calls just to listen, and I have to be careful with that because sometimes it can disrupt the meeting and need to let them do their thing. Whereas sometimes actually I really want to either input on something, or if there's a product demo because there's something new, I might like tee that up, for example, and stuff like that, and then get feedback from the guys. And I also ask them to send me video recordings of demos every now and again in conversations. The key thing for my role, as you say, as you go through these things, is not losing touch with what's actually going on. That's the number one thing, really. You can be the smartest person in the world and sit in your office, like you said, and have all your break Bunsen burner ideas and stuff. But if you don't engage with the customer, generation of the business, you're going to be completely clueless, really, to actually what's going on. So, although I don't go on as many demos as I should, I'd admit that I need to speak to more customers face to face and get on with it, kind of thing, face to face, Zoom to Zoom, I guess. But really staying in touch is critical, like you say, to kind of the sales org, because it's the business, it's a huge part of it.
Yeah. And how would you define the culture within your sales org? And is it the same as the rest of the business, or does it have its own little subculture?
All departments have their own subculture. That's just the way it is. I would say that the whole company at ContentCal is very growth focused. Internally, the theme for the year is amplify our growth. Last year was about getting to the growth stage, which we believe we've done. Now it's actually let's amplify that considerably. So we really are the number one player in the market. We're the number one choice. We're the first to mind, etc. And the sales guys in particular, obviously, absolutely have that. They are somewhat restricted by what the product is able to do and how fast we can go, etc. But we encourage it across the whole company, and everyone has to have a growth mindset. If you want to be within the company, you've got to really want to succeed and push and be challenged, and also celebrate successes. We don't want it to be it's a very positive environment, but it's very growth focused. And with sales, I think feedback is critical. You've got to be able to, as a team, pat each other on the back when things go really well, but also sit down and say, mate, you know what, that demo was rubbish and you didn't say these things and you were obviously off that day. Let's have an open dialogue about it, whatever. So we really encourage transparency and just open dialogue, because that doesn't mean anyone's right or wrong. Some people are having really tough times at the moment in general, but just really support each other, because we, if the sales team is successful, the business is successful. That's kind of the mantra.
Yeah, so true. I harp on it about this. Your sales team are, particularly in the climate that we're in now, are just, it's obvious, but they're so critical to the success of every business. They are front and center, and they need to be invested in, looked after, culturally important to the business and seen as such. And it's interesting to hear you talk about that. What last question for me, really, before we sort of wrap up. From a founder perspective, your business gets bigger, you get more disconnected from the frontline sales reps who are out there driving revenue to your business. What advice would you give to those people coming into ContentCal or anywhere else to say, this is how you have an impact on a business? These are the things that you need to do to get noticed, to move forward and have a genuine commercial impact. What would be your advice?
Yeah, I would say learn the product and the story and the mechanics of your department in particular as quickly as possible. Make notes, write things down, write down names, understand roles, understand the dynamics of how that all works. And once you've nailed that, really focus on that and make it known. The other thing is make it public to your line manager and your team. That's what my process is. That's what I'm going to do. So they don't just think you're just siloing yourself. Once you understand that, then go out to the wider org and get your head around that. And you can do that all within some of that in 2 weeks kind of thing. So I'm kind of thinking the first 2 weeks to a month, so that all the inner workings of the company and your department plus externally, into other departments, and your story and your script. Then go and get as much feedback on all of that as possible. This is how I understand how this works. This is my sales pitch. This is what I'm going to do, blah, blah, blah. So get as much feedback as you can. it's one of those cliche ones, but in company meetings and other things, like, don't be afraid to introduce yourself if you're not comfortable. Obviously in sales, you're going to have to be, because that's kind of what you're doing most of the time. But like in other roles, just get comfortable with a quick, like you said at the start, 1 minute, 30-second pitch on who you are, what you like, because you've got to do that as that's just human nature at the end of the day, to kind of be in the group. And then just execute as ruthlessly as possible for the first 3 months, really. Like, not, above and beyond that, obviously, but like the first 3 months in any role when you're first starting is just so critical, because if you're successful, then you've set yourself up for this like accelerated learning period. And some people, give themselves 6 months to do that, but I would say do it as quickly as you can and start adding value as quickly as you can.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And let's test your sales skills then. So who, your eyes go as wide as possible. Who should buy from ContentCal? Why should they buy to ContentCal? And if they want to buy, where do they find you?
Who should buy ContentCal? So anyone who creates a lot of content and publishes it online, basically. We can publish to 1,500 different channels, whether that's internal and external communications. So our background was traditionally social networks. We actually now publish to basically every platform. So if you create a lot of content and you have a workflow process behind that, we're the perfect tool for you. We can automate a lot of that. We can give you all the reporting under one place. That appeals to both agencies, freelancers, right the way through to B2B and B2C businesses. And we sell to primarily sort of mid-market enterprise. So if you're a really small business, we do have sort of solutions for you, but there are others that are suited to go sort of neutral on the market. If you're sort of a sort of 5 to 25 upwards marketing team, and you want to empower your whole organization to become content creators, we're the perfect people for you. And you can sign up on ContentCal.io at any point for a free trial, so you can access it for free and see what you think before you have to buy from us.
and where can people find some of your personal content? Because you talked about putting more content out there this year. If people want to follow you, what's the best platform to use for that?
Yeah, I'm at Alex Packham on basically every channel. I think on Instagram, I'm at AST Packham. That's for my initials. But yeah, if you put me into any of those, you'll find me, and I'll be publishing lots of ramblings on the journey of ContentCal, so you can follow along on those. Love it.
Well, Alex, I've genuinely really enjoyed chatting to you today. I've learned some things as well, which is fantastic. I'm sure the people watching this have learned plenty. It's great to get to know ContentCal a bit better too. Thank you ever so much for your contribution today. And I'll be following you along your journey across the year. Well done so far, and good luck in your triple revenue growth across 2021 as well.
Thanks so much. Great to be here. Thanks, Owen. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.